Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. In his book, Recovery 2.0, author Tommy Rosen talks about how he brings yoga practice into his recovery in order to further strengthen the foundation that he got from working the 12 steps and from living a life where he works the 12 steps. And in the current chapter that I'm reading, he talks about the guidelines, the moral and philosophical guidelines that yoga provides him that add even more to his spiritual practice and his spiritual life. So today I'm going to read a little bit about that and get into the first guideline and how that has both worked in my recovery and also the places where I need to improve on it. So what he says is, when you think about yoga, you probably envision the physical practice of various postures. We will certainly get there in this book, but first I'm excited to share the ethical and philosophical underpinnings of yoga so you can develop a broader view of this amazing path. The parallels between yoga philosophy and 12-step philosophy are innumerable. Energetically, the two paths carry great resonance and complete each other. The 12 steps offer people in recovery a foundation that yoga cannot offer. Yoga offers people in recovery critical elements that the 12 steps cannot offer. Taken together, these two approaches form what I consider the most powerful and joyful approach to overcoming addiction. I want to offer a brief analysis of yoga's ethical guidelines, which are known as the Yamas and Nayamas. These add dimension and depth to the ethical viewpoints contained within the 12 steps. In addition, our ethics are locked away in rooms with neither doors nor keys to open them. In recovery, we gradually gain access to these rooms. So today I'm going to talk about the first of the 5 restraints, or the yamas. And he says the yamas are the 5 restraints that guide us in our relationship with the external world. They generally provide us with guidelines for what not to do. So the first yama is Ahimsa. And here's what he says about Ahimsa. Ahimsa means nonviolence or non-harming. Inflict no harm upon others or yourself. When they hear this, the first thing most people think of is physical violence, but Ahimsa also includes nonviolence in thoughts and words. It is impossible to carry resentment, for example, and live in the essence of Ahimsa. You have to face your resentments as you do in the 4th step in order to live up to this ideal. This includes any self-directed speech or thought you may carry. Do not complete a negative sentence in your head about yourself. It is not always easy to refrain from doing this, given where some of your notions about yourself come from. So it's interesting that he brings this up, because I have never considered myself a violent person, at least not physically. I have never really been in a fight. I don't condone violence of any sort, and I just never really thought of myself that way. But once I got in recovery, this took on a different meaning, and one of the first ways that I saw this happening, as silly as this may sound, was watching people squash bugs really started to bother me. And, when my wife sees a bug in the house, her first reaction is to just step on it. And it started to really, really bother me, because I felt like that's a life that's just as valuable as mine. That we really shouldn't just extinguish that life unless there is a definite reason for it. If there's a, dangerous spider that could potentially harm one of us and there's no way to get it back outside, then obviously I'm going to take my family's safety as the first priority. But if there's something else that we can, avoid killing, it made sense to me to do so. And it was a change that I couldn't explain that well, except just the idea that I didn't like that level of violence. Again, that might sound silly, but I think that's what's at the heart of Ahimsa, is really looking at any kind of violent action as a violation of these principles. Now, places where I still am falling short on this is in my thoughts, because this goes beyond physical violence. And this goes to your thoughts and the way you think about not only yourself, but other people. And I still have to very closely monitor my thoughts to make sure they're not veering into the violent side. And violent in terms not of fantasizing of being physically violent, but of doing things like criticizing others, forming resentments, letting my pride and ego bring me to a place where I start feeling condescending toward other people. These are the kinds of things that I have to really be careful of, because as soon as those types of thoughts enter my mind, I've got some potentially big problems on my hands. So I like what he brings up about Ahimsa, and I want to read a example that he gives about the way that someone else's words and the kind of violent way they put them had an effect on him, because this helps me understand how my words can have an effect on someone else. He says, "In stressful moments, my father used to say to me, 'When you're 40, you won't have a pot to piss in.' That was my dad's way of communicating his fear that I wouldn't find financial stability in my life and that I would suffer the way he had under the weight of economic insecurity. The truth was that he cared deeply about me and only wanted me to figure it all out. Unfortunately, the words he chose and the underlying fear brought about a different kind of effect from the one my dad or I had hoped for. His words ended up being a curse with energy and a life all their own, which rented space in my head both subconsciously and consciously until much later in my life. As I approached my 40th birthday, those words became very present for me. I did not end up as my father had feared, without a pot to piss in, yet I was not free either. I would have to admit that I had made these words true in my mind to some extent, and they had to be reworked into something more positive. I came up with this: you are surrounded by abundance and opportunity, Tommy, and I trust you to find your way, and that your way is the path, and it is the right path for you. I love you." I like to believe this is what my father actually meant. And I think that's a powerful example of how a lot of times when we have these thoughts that border on violent thinking, where we're thinking very negatively, we've got to not try to get rid of the thoughts necessarily, because that doesn't ever really work well for me, and I don't think it works well for other people either. But reframing the thoughts does work well. Taking a negative thought and trying to reframe it. So if someone does something to you that hurts you, and this is what for me, this is what the fourth step prayer is all about. If I see someone and they hurt me, and I get upset and angry with them, one way for me to turn that around is to try to put myself in their shoes, and then instead of being angry for them, pray for them. Whatever caused them to react toward me in that way, to treat me the way they did, pray that they get relief and some kind of comfort from that. Thinking of other people as being in a position where, as the big book of AA says, they're sick, the sick man's prayer. We look at other people and say, you know what, this person is hurting too. And I pray for them to stop hurting, to get what they need, to stop hurting and be at peace. And that can help reframe things. And if you need help beyond just what the fourth step prayer teaches, if you need help beyond what you see in the big book, what you talk about with sponsors, another great way to learn how to reframe your thoughts is cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's really what saved me. Have hooked up with multiple very intelligent, good cognitive behavioral therapists throughout my life, and the one that I had in treatment really, really helped me to learn how to reframe my thinking, so that all of the negative thoughts that were bothering me, I could take them and turn them on their head a little bit. Taking those thoughts and moving them away from the violent aspect and into more nonviolence, that's part of what we're trying to learn how to practice here. And he ends this section by saying, addiction is inherently harmful. We're taking a substance and choosing a behavior that's harmful to us. By extension, our addiction can harm those around us. My 12-step path helps me to see where I harm others. My adherence to the path of yoga reinforces my commitment to grow along spiritual lines. Clearly, we all have work to do, but I feel it is our willingness to self-reflect and self-correct that keeps us headed in the right direction. Both paths help with this. So couple this idea of nonviolence with everything that we learn in the 12 steps, and you get a very powerful picture of the right way to move forward. I think that's what we're going to find in looking at the principles that he's laying down here, is that these match very well with what we're talking about in 12-step work. So I look forward to reading more about the other yamas in the next few days, and I look forward to seeing more how they can help strengthen my own foundation that I have for my spiritual journey through the 12 steps. That's it for today. Have a good one, and I'll see you back tomorrow.